Hello, Agus Felcha, how are you doing? Hello and welcome everyone to my weekly programming series, which is either going to be alternating jump into JavaScript and slip into Ruby, or it's just going to be one or the other, depending on what people actually want. Let me just get all my ducks in a row here. Yeah, right. Okay, so first things first, just need to make sure that if we are doing MV, that the Notepad++ display is sufficiently visible. Ooh, that's a little bit small, so I'm just going to zoom in on that, I think. There we go, that's much better. Okay, it looks like I've got a couple of viewers. I think I'm not entirely sure whether to continue with VXAce Ruby code or move on to MV. Hey, Siegfried McBacon, how's it going? What do you think? Actually, you know what? Just while I'm doing this, I've been meaning for ages to add a chat widget to my thingamajigger, so let me just go ahead and do that now. While I am trying to get everything else sorted. Yeah, so what do you guys want to see from tonight? Would you like more Ruby? Move on to JavaScript? You just want to chat about random bollocks? I'm easy either way. Title this jump into JavaScript, so JS it is. Yep, that is entirely fair, Zeke. That is entirely fair. Okay. So, the very first default script for RPG Maker MV is incredibly simple. It's just this main.js, and all it does is it calls the setup function of Plugin Manager, passing in a global list of all the plugins that have been loaded for the project. And then we've got this window.onload function. This will be called automatically when the window object loads, which we'll see in RPG core.js. And all it does is calls the run function of scene manager, passing in scene boot, which may not look very, it probably doesn't look like it makes any sense. And if you excuse me, my very damp dog is trying to get my attention. Yes, hello, boss. I'm trying to stream, mate. Was it raining outside by any chance? Ugh. Wet dog. So I have a first-time chat from viewer Azelia Chan. Hi Azelia, nice of you to join me as I'm fighting my dog for space. Yeah, so basically all that does is just when the window loads, it runs the kind of base scene of the engine. So let's move on to RPG core.js, which is a little bit more exciting. Okay, so they have defined a new function called JS extensions, which contains some methods that will be added to the standard JavaScript object. And if you try to call that directly, it just throws an error saying this is not a class because it's not. So that will come into play at some point below here. They have added a new function to numbers. This is not. I'm just trying to think if I should explain prototypes for people who aren't necessarily familiar with JavaScript. Yeah, so this whole thingy of a prototype, it's basically a property that every object has. And if you add functions or properties to the prototype, it just makes sure that every instance of that object will have it. So because this is being added to number.prototype, it means that any number that you create will have the clamp function available to it. Boss, will you calm down, please? And yeah, by all means, lurk away. This is... Boss! Oh, my dog is not going to leave me alone, and Kit's not here, so I have the place to myself tonight, so if the dog does play up, I'm going to have to sort him. The joys. Yeah, so we're adding a new function to number.prototype, meaning it'll be available to any number, called clamp. And it takes... Right, if you'll just give me one moment, I need to go and feed the dog. I will be back in 2. Okay, Pupper Supper has been delivered. Sorry about that. Right. Oh, I swear to God, I could murder that dog sometimes. Okay, so where was I? Yeah, number.prototype.clamp. So this function takes 2 parameters, a minimum and a maximum, which is obviously the lower boundary and the upper boundary. And what it does is it returns the minimum value between the maximum value between the current number and the minimum and the maximum, which probably sounds completely gibberish, but let me kind of try and demystify that for a second. So let's say we have a number and we are constantly adding 1 to it for some reason. And then we call its clamp method, function even, passing in a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 100. Now let's say that the number is currently 90. So math.max 90 and 1 will give us 90 because 90 is greater than 1, obviously. So this basically ends up being 90. And then it gets the minimum between 90 and 100, which is 90. So it just returns itself, which is not particularly exciting. But let's say that the number had been increased to 101, for example. So minimum is still 1, max is still 100. So the maximum between the current number, 101, and minimum 1 is 101. So that's fine, that will just be 101. And then we get the minimum between 101 and 100, so it returns 100. And that basically just clamps it to make sure that it is no lower than the minimum and no higher than the maximum. Quite simple, really. So they've also added a convenience function for numbers called mod, which performs a modulo operation with a given divisor, which is the parameter n, and it returns right. I should probably explain something about this. And also, because Bacon Dragon said it was still silent and showing back starting soon for him, if you could confirm that I am actually live and you're seeing this and that I'm not just talking to myself, that'd be fantastic. Yeah, so mod this. Basically, in a function, when you use the keyword this, it represents the current execution context. And by that, what I mean is that it'll be basically whatever object is executing the function. So in this case, this is just whichever number is currently processing this mod function. So numbers in JavaScript are just objects like everything else, and they can have properties and they can have functions and all sorts of weird and wonderful things. So yeah, we're just returning the current number modulo n. Modulo divides by the number and then returns the remainder, plus n modulo n. So let's say we have the number 10 and we've passed in a divisor of 5. So 10 modulo 5 is 2, remainder 0, so that will just be 0, plus n, so that'll be 5 modulo 5, which I think will just return 0. So yeah, it's just to get the modulo value of the number, which is used in a few different places in the base code. It's not something you'll probably have to use yourself often, if at all, so don't worry too much about it. Just kind of know that it's there, and if you need it, it can be used on any number. So the next new thing that they've added is a format function to strings prototype. So this can be called on any string, which again is just an object like any other in JavaScript. So it takes no parameters, or rather it can take any number of parameters, and returns a formatted string. So first of all, we set a temporary variable called args to the arguments that are passed into it, whatever they happen to be. And then we're returning the result of calling the replace function on the current string. And what we're replacing is a % followed by any number of digits from 0 to 9, at least 1, globally, and we're replacing that with a function where the current match is represented by s, and the current index is s, I think, and the whole string is s, and n is the current character, I think. I can't remember how this works. What do you think? I am an expert. And it returns the element of args at that is an index, sorry. Yeah, number n, so it just converts n to a number before factoring it in, -1. So that'll just get whatever that index of the arguments that were passed in is. Say we did, for example, hello world percent 1 dot format so we'll take the thing out there, and we did that. So args would end up just being the string exclamation mark as an array, so just one element, and then it would replace the %1 with the argument at an index that corresponds to it, which would be 0 because you're taking away 1 from it, and the 0 indexed argument is an exclamation mark. So that would just replace the %1 in here with the exclamation point. Oh, I think I got a new follow there. Thank you very much, Willy Buzz. So yeah, that is format. Next up, we have a new function available to strings called pad0. This takes length as a parameter and will basically just, as the name suggests, pad out your string with zeros. For example, if you did that, the output would end up being that. And how it does this is we set a variable called s to this, which will just end up being whatever the current string is. And the reason we do that is because the string is going to be modified in place. And you don't want to modify this because that is just like the execution context. You never want to directly manipulate this. Bad things will happen if you do. So we're setting s to this just so that we've got a copy of it. And then while the length of s is less than the length passed in, we set s to the string 0 plus s and then return it. So what that does is it basically just goes through a while loop for each number in length. So to start with, s is just 1. And in the first iteration of the loop, s.length is 1, which is less than 4. So s is set to 0 plus that, which results in s being that. The next time through, s.length is 2, which is still less than 4. So s is set to 0 plus that, which results in it being that. And so on and so forth until it gets to the desired length, which it will in the next iteration where it adds another 0, and that is how we pad out our numbers. Really useful little function, especially if you're doing things like HP and MP displays where you want to have leading zeros. And then we have the pad0 function for numbers, which just returns the string version for this, the current number, and calls the pad0 function of the string. And the reason that it does that is because it's a lot harder to pad a number out with zeros than it is a string. So it converts it to a string first, adds on however many zeros on the beginning, and then it will end up being a number at the end because that's the kind of object that you called it on. Okay, Zeke has returned from making something. Welcome back from your thing Mac. I hope it was a successful macking of a thing. Okay, so you'll see this quite a lot in the default code as well, this object.define properties. And it's kind of a similar thing to this kind of function format, but it makes it easier to quickly denote multiple things at once. So this could have been done as array.prototype.equals equals function whatever, and then all this stuff. But you can also do it as object.define properties as well. So we're defining a method called equals. It's going to check whether two arrays are the same, and it takes as its parameter the array to compare to. I cannot remember offhand what enumerable true or false does. I don't think it's vastly important in the grand scheme of things, and it's kind of slightly beyond the scope of the kind of stuff we cover here. So I think it's generally false. I'll have to have a look at that and see what it actually does. And then the value for equals is a new function with the function variable array. So that's the parameter that it takes in. And if there is no array parameter, if it's null or blank or whatever, or the length of the array is not equal to the one it's checking against, we return false. I mean, that's obvious. If there isn't an array to compare to, or they're different lengths, they cannot be the same array. So we already know that that's being rejected right off the bat. Otherwise, we have a for loop using iteration variable I, which starts at 0, and as long as I is less than the length of the array that's calling this function, we add 1 to it. For loops are pretty simple things, so hopefully don't have to explain how they work to you, but if I do, please let me know and I will gladly delve deeper into that. Anyway, inside this for loop, if the current element of the array is an instance of array, meaning that the element is an array itself, which would make it a 2D array or more, and the same element of the comparison array is an instance of an array, then we're basically doing a recursive call here, where if calling equals on that element and passing in the corresponding element of the other array returns false, then we also return false. So basically, if you've got an array in the array, then it goes through all this rigmarole again, but passing in whatever that array element is, and checks whether that meets all these criteria. And so it kind of does a recursive loop through all of the stuff inside the array to see if it's equal as well. And obviously, if that returns false, then we know that the array itself is false, or isn't the same, so we return false for that as well. And otherwise, so that would be if either the current element is not an instance of array, or the other one is not an instance of array, and the element is not equal, then we return false, because if they're not the same element, they can't be the same array. And then after all of that, we return true, because the only other option left is that these are in fact the same array. So let's say we had the array 1, 2, 3 as numbers, and the array 1, 2, 3 as numbers. So if we did that, it would return true, because the array containing 1, 2, and 3 as digits is the same as the array containing 1, 2, and 3 as digits. If we did that, it would return false. And the reason for that is that it's using the strict equality comparison. That's why there's two equal signs. And that means that the two values have to be the same type to be considered the same thing. If the code was just exclamation mark equals, that would actually return true, because that is type coercive comparison, where JavaScript will try to convert the objects to the same type before comparing them. I tend to shy away from that. There is very rarely a reason to use it, and it can result in some unexpected behaviors if you don't know what you're doing with it. And again, if either of those had been an array, it would kind of recursively go through those arrays as well to see if they were equal, and either return false if they're not, or true if they are, and then keep going from there. It seems that I have 5 viewers now, so hello to anybody new who joined while I was waffling on there. Right, so the next new property that we're defining for array.prototype is clone. This creates a shallow copy of the array, again enumerable as false, and the value function returns this .slice 0. And what that does, Willy Bo says, my shitty internet makes it seem like you're repeating yourself a lot. Maybe that will help with learning. Yeah, quite possibly. But thank you for joining me anyway, Willy. I hope you gain something educational from this, even if you have to gain it multiple times. I'm sorry that you're dealing with that. I did initially have my stream bitrate set a bit too high before. I have now put that down quite considerably, So it should hopefully be a bit less laggy on my end now, but unfortunately I can't do anything about anyone else's internet. But hopefully it doesn't affect things too badly. So yeah, the array.slice function takes as its parameter an index and returns a new copy of the array from that index to an optional ending index. And if you don't provide the end index, it just goes to the end of the array. Azuria says, it's just went right over my head. What bit rate you want? I think 4,500. Let me just doubly check. Yeah, 4,500 I've got it set at. So when you say it went right over your head, do you mean what I'm talking about here, or because I can try and you don't really need over 2,500. Okay, I will look at changing that from an next stream, see if it improves things any. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm pretty new to streaming. This is all just like people say, oh, you should do this and you should do that. And I'm like, okay, that sounds viable. I will do the thing. And somebody said that 4,500 was a good thing to have for bitrate. And I was like, yeah, the higher the number, the better, obviously. But then 5,500 wasn't good. So, you know. Willie says, in my case, it's most likely the snowstorm outside. It tends to anger the internet gods. Oh, you never want to anger the internet gods. It's fine. Also, I can be your Twitch sensei. Oh, I appreciate that, Azuria. Yeah, if you can give me tips on not completely sucking at this, I would be very appreciative, because I have no idea what I'm doing half the time. Yeah, so do you want me to go through the array.slice function in a bit more depth, or is it just one of those things where it's like, no matter how much you break this down, I will not understand it? Neither do any of us. Yeah, that's like the secret to life in general, and like adulting and things like that. Is that there are no adultier adults. Everybody's just like equally good at pretending they know what the hell is going on, but none of us actually do. I will move on. If you want me to come back to anything, just let me know and I'll go back to things. I'm good. I don't want to derail as I'm dumb and won't get it. Fair enough. Well, I appreciate you being here anyway. Feel free to just like waffle in the chat if you just want to talk to me about stuff while I'm covering all this. Right. So the next one is contains. This checks whether the array contains a given element. Again, we're setting a numerable to false, and I can't remember what that does. And then for the value returned from this, we're taking a function where the current array element is just represented by element, and we're returning whether the result of calling the index of function passing in element is greater than or equal to 0. Now to compress that a little. So index of, when you call it on a array, let's say we had 1, 2, 3 dot index of 2. That will return 1 because that is the position in the array that 2 is located at. If we'd done index of 3, we would get 2 because that's the position of 3. And you'll notice that it's 1 less than the number that we put in because indexes for arrays start at 0. So this is the 0 index of the array, this is the 1 index, and this is the 2 index. If we did dot index of 4, we would get back -1 because that is the value that comes back if it cannot find the chosen element in the array. And you'll note that that is why this condition is what it is. So if we did 1, 2, 3 dot contains 1, what it'll do is it'll go through each element of this array and run this function against it. Is that? Oh no, sorry. It will basically replace this with this function here. So this is what gets pushed into the element part. So when you refer to element in this code here, it will end up being whatever value was passed into this, which in the case of this example will be 1. So it's effectively changing it to this. And then it checks whether this dot index of is greater than 0. So this is the array 1, 2, 3, since that's the array that called the contains function, and then it's calling index of and passing in 1 and checking whether that is greater than or equal to 0. So as I've just explained with the index of function, it will find 1 here at an index of 0, and that is greater than or equal to 0 because it is in fact equal to 0, so that part will return true. So that returns true to this function here, which means that the value returned by contains will also be true, and this overall will return true. If the index of had returned false, like say we'd done .contains 4, that will then do .index of 4. That is -1, so that returns false to the contains, which returns false overall. And that is how babies are made. Yeah, this all seems a bit esoteric, and it can be hard to grasp when you're just kind of clinically going through it like this. But hopefully with like examples and going through it line by line and covering like what these values actually become when the code runs will demystify things a little bit at least. Just undo all the changes there. So then they have added a contains function for strings as well, which checks whether a string contains a given string. So you can do something like hello world dot contains hello, and what that will do is it takes string as a parameter, so that's what we've put in here, so that will end up being the string hello there, and then it returns this, which will currently be hello world dot index of string, which is this, greater than or equal to 0. And index of can take strings, so it checks whether the index at which it finds this string here is greater than or equal to 0, and it will find that at index 0 because that is where the hello starts, and 0 is obviously greater than or equal to 0, so it will return true. If we did hello world.contains world, it will look for this substring in this string and find it at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So at index 6 it returns that, so 6 is greater than or equal to 0, it returns true, so the string does contain the substring. Dog, what are you doing? Are you playing with rubbish? Oh, for the love of Christ. Yeah, so that is .contains. And last but not least, in the new stuff that the developers of MV added for our viewing and convenience pleasure, is a new function in the math module called random int. And it takes as its parameter a maximum value, which is the upper boundary, which will be excluded from the random number generated, and it returns the floor, as in the lowest integer, from the max multiplied by math.random. Now math.random is a built-in JS function that gives you a random number between 0 and 1. So it could be that, for example. When you multiply your maximum by that, let's say I did math.random int 10, it'll generate a random number between 0 and 1, and then multiply max by it. So then that will give me whatever the result of that multiplication is as a very long decimal, and then it will floor it, so it will reduce it to the lowest integer from that decimal value. And so basically, when you do math.random int 10, you will get a random integer from 0 to 9. We used to have to basically do this manually in VXAs, so it's... Boss, will you stop making noise? I'm trying to stream here. Yes, I know you like making noise, dog, but you are not streaming. Please stop. Performance stop it. Thank you. Nah, he's not listening. There's like a crisp packet or something down by my feet, and he's just chewing on it. Hopefully that's not making too much noise, but we'll move past it. and see how we get on with that. So yeah, that is math.randomInt. So then we have a class that defines utility methods called utils. And if you try to create one of these by doing new utils, it will throw an error saying this is a static class because you... Right, please don't pull my PS2 down. Well, no, can you... for the love of God. Right, 2 seconds. Right. Oh, Christ. The dog has managed to get his paw fangled in a PS2 controller. Give me a second. There we go. Come here so that I can take this. There we go. Right, are you unfangled? How did you get yourself so horrendously tangled in this thing? Right, I'm trying to help you. There we go. Oh, mother of God. Gamer doggy. Yeah. Right, where was I? Ah, yes, the utils class. So the first function, or sorry, the first constant available to utils is rpgmaker_name, and you can tell it's a constant because it's in all caps. That's not a requirement or anything, it's just a naming convention. You'll see that a lot. If it's in all caps, it's a constant, means it will never change. So utils.rpgmaker_name is just set to mv. So if you type this in your code, you will get this. And it means that you can check whether you are currently in mv rather than mz using this utils. Azaria says, give Pupper cuddles from me. I will once he dries off a bit. It's been raining and he's very soggy. He is a sog rather than a dog. We've then got rpgmaker_version. This is updated every time they put out an update to MV, which hasn't happened for a while. I think actually the latest one is 1.6.2, but I'm working a version behind in my core code at the moment, so I just have 1.6.1 here. I don't think 1.6.2 added a massive amount of stuff, so it shouldn't really matter yet, but we shall see. We've then got a function called isOptionValid, and it takes as its parameter a name. This checks whether the given option is in the query string for the application that the game is running on. And you'll see this used later on, and then I can kind of explain a bit more about exactly what it does. But it's basically checking the... when you run your MV game, it creates an HTML5 app and gives it a dynamically generated URL. And that's what location refers to. So it's calling search, which looks for a particular pattern in a given string. Taking .slice1, which I think is because there is a character at the 0 index that it doesn't want to include. Splits that on the ampersand, which is where a URL splits from its domain part and its options or variables, and checks whether that array contains the name that we passed in, and if it does, we return 1 because it does contain that option. If the type of NW, which is the NWJS platform that MV runs on... Oh, 2 seconds. So Siegfried has just informed me that 1.6.2 was the removal of some Japanese service, so nothing that had affected search outside of Japan. Japanese version of MV had to be updated with the closing of the connected service, open game creators to 1.6.2. To match this, the English version was updated, but there is no actual code change beyond that. Fantastic, thank you, Zeke. So yeah, we'll have all the latest stuff, even though it's 1.6.1. Cool. So if the type of NW is not equal to undefined, which means that we are running on NW.js, and that means that it's not running a web deployment, because remember, NV can deploy to web, and the node NW.js apps argv property length is greater than 0, which means the arguments have been supplied to the NW.js app. And the 0 index of the argument list split on an ampersand, same as here, it contains the name, we return 1. These are just two different ways of doing the same thing, but one is for web deployments where you've got a URL, and one is for when it's running on NW.js and doesn't have that web URL to check. And if neither of those returns 1, we return 0 because the option is not valid. We've then got is NW.js for utils, and this returns type of require equals function and type of process equals object. Require is an NW.js specific keyword and is not available to web deployments. So if you check whether that is equal to function, you can tell that that is NW.js because it will not on a web deployment. And also type of process equals object, because I think in a web deployment the process type is different. So it's just telling you if you're on a particular platform or not. Then we've got is mobile device, which checks whether the platform is a mobile. So R is set to a regex pattern. You can tell it's a regular expression because it's got these forward slashes on the beginning and end. And it's basically a list of possible strings. So we've got Android or WebOS or iPhone or iPad or iPod or BlackBerry or IE Mobile or Opera Mini. That is case insensitive, so even though these are capitalized in the appropriate places, the actual pattern match won't care about that, so it will still match BlackBerry if it's a small b and a small b. And then it returns, checks the navigator, which is, I think, a property or an object that is available to the mobile OS. .user agent, which has information about the platform that the app is running on. .match, and then passes in this regex pattern, which basically checks whether the user agent for the current navigator matches any of these strings here. And then it double negates it for some reason. So that's basically return not. That, which, like, as far as I know, just does the same thing as that, but double negation it is. Maybe there's a reason for that. So we've got this is mobile Safari, does more or less the same thing. That is checking the navigator.user agent and then matching that against iPhone, iPad, and iPod, and checking that it matches Apple WebKit and that it doesn't match CryOS, which I'm guessing is something in a different platform. I don't actually know what CryOS is. Then we've got is Android Chrome, checks whether the browser is Chrome, funnily enough. So there we are checking the agent match against Android and against Chrome. We've then got utils.canReadGameFiles, checks to see whether the browser is able to read files in the game folder. So we're setting a temporary variable called script to document.getElements by tag name script. Document is the document that the game is running in, so that is the kind of HTML object that was created when you started running it. Because it still runs in a browser even if it's not a web deployment. It's just a standalone browser instead of on your actual system browser. Are you quite done? Have you enjoyed your reign of destruction? You just want cuddles, is that it? We're going to take a 5-minute break while I play with the dog. Right, you're going to behave so that I can stream. Are you? Can you do that for me? CryOS appears to be Chrome running on iOS. Thanks, Zeke. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so can read game files. We've got script equals document.getElement. So document is the document that it's running in. Get elements by tag name just goes through the document object model, the DOM, which you'll see if you inspect the source of any web page. And it looks for anything that has a script tag. So you'll see that if you've got a web page that's running JavaScript on it, it will have these script tags. So document.getElements by tag name script will just get all of those as an array, and that is what's being stored in this variable. Then we're setting a temporary variable called lastScript to the element of the scripts array at the length of it -1, which just gets the most recent index in it. We're setting a variable called XHR to a new instance of the XML HTTP request class, which is used for data transfers and requests to a particular URL. And then we've got a try-catch block. Now, what a try-catch block does is it attempts to do the stuff here, and if it encounters an error, it will store the error object in the variable, the parameter for the catch block, and then run whatever code is in here. Boss, will you please leave me the hell alone? I'm trying to stream. Okay, so first thing in the try block is xhr.open, and it's passing in two arguments to the open function there, get as a string and lastScript.src. So basically, if you've got a tag that's like that, last script will be, let's say this is the only script on the thing. So scripts will contain this tag here, and then when we do xhr.openGet, we're taking the last script, which is this one, .src, so it looks at this attribute here and tries to open a file called blah blah blah.js. Helpful Onion says, hey boss, also hi Trihan. Oh, so the dog gets a greeting before I do. That's lovely. Yeah, everybody just wants me for my dog. You can kind of see his tail wagging in the background of my thing there. Of course. Yeah, so basically all this does is tries to open the file that is sourced on the script tag. Then it sets the override MIME type to text/JavaScript, and that just tells the XML HTTP request object that it is JavaScript that you're trying to retrieve. And then it calls xhr.send, which attempts to get whatever code is in the file. And that is basically how you how the engine reads the plugins. What are you up to? I'm doing Jump into JavaScript, which is basically a breakdown series where I'm going through all of the default engine code in RPG Maker MV and just breaking down what it does, how it works, what functions are available when you're like writing your own code and plugins and stuff. So I'm currently just breaking down the one called RPG_core.js, which is effectively the core of the engine. This is all the basic stuff that it needs to run. And then we return true. And it only gets to this point if there were no errors either opening the SRC or sending the contents of it to the request. So if we get to this point, we know that there have been no problems, and then we can return true because we can read game files. We've just proven that we can. And otherwise, we catch the error and just return false. We don't need to do anything with the error object itself, but it has to be passed as a parameter to the catch block. That's just a requirement of try catch. Even if you don't do anything with it, it's still needed. But again, we were just telling it that it cannot read game files, so we don't need to like show the error message or do anything else with that. So the next utils function that has been defined by the developers of MV is RGB to CSS Color, and it takes 3 parameters: R for the red value from 0 to 255, G for the green value from 0 to 255, and B for the blue value from 0 to 255, and it returns the color as a CSS string. So it takes R and sets it to itself rounded, which means that if the value is a decimal, so if it's like 1.5 for example, that will round it to the nearest integer, which for 0.5 will be rounding up, so that will give you did I say 5.5? So if it's 5.5, it will be 6, essentially. And that does that for the green component, and it does it for the blue component, and then it returns the string RGB, and then each of those values in brackets separated by commas. So if you did say utils.rgb to CSS color, and you passed it 108, 50 and 47, what you will get back is that. And that is the format that it needs to be in to use an RGB color as a CSS property. CSS being the cascading style sheets that you use to style web pages so that they're not just static blocks of text on a screen. That's how you make web pages look fancy, essentially. So we've got an internal property, and you can tell it's an internal property because it has an underscore. That again is not a requirement, it's just a naming convention. It's something they decided to do so that you can look at something and tell whether it's an internal property or more a private member, say. But JavaScript doesn't have property privacy the way some other programming languages do. So there's nothing stopping you from accessing this elsewhere. It's just to basically say, yeah, if you can avoid it, please don't. But it's not required to avoid it. And then we've got this function called generate runtime ID, which is defined as a function that returns utils._id++. And all that does is increments the value and then returns that. So it started out as 1. If that is called when it's 1, it will then become 2. If it's 2, then it will become 3, and so on and so forth. We also have a private property called support passive event, which is set to null initially. We've got a function called isSupportPassiveEvent, which checks whether the browser supports passive events. And if the type of utils._supportPassiveEvent is equal to the string boolean, which it will not be initially because, as we saw there, it starts out as null, then we return that property's value, which will either be true or false. Then we set a temporary variable called passive to false. We're setting a variable called options to object.defineProperty, and it's defining a property for oh god, how do these work again? Is it the when you define the property, that is the it's everything I ever knew about object.defineProperty is just leaked out of my ears. You know, you don't actually need to know the exact mechanics of how stuff like this works. Define property is a bit of a complex one. Basically, it's defining a passive property on objects and allowing you to get that property. And if you do, it sets the passive property to true. But if the passive property is used somewhere, I will be able to break that down a little bit more for you. Then we're calling the add event listener function on the window object, passing in test for the event, null for the callback function, I think it is, and options for the options. I'll need to have a look at that one as well. Adding an event listener, there's various types of events that a window can have. You can have like on key press or on mouse up or on focus, things like that. These are all built in, and you can add a listener that will basically call a particular function when that event happens on the object. So you could say add an on-click event listener to window, and that will allow you to run a function when the window is clicked. And then utils._support passive event is set to the value of the passive property, which will initially be false, but may be changed by the getting function of the options. And then we're returning the value of passive, which will either be true if it supports passive events, which it will if it gets through all this stuff intact, and false otherwise. Next up, we have a class called cache entry. This allows us to basically cache objects and resources, which means that they will be initially loaded into memory when needed, and the next time they are referenced, if they already exist in memory, then the existing one will be used, and if they don't, then they will be loaded into memory and added to the cache. And it just prevents you from having to have the same object in memory in different locations, because if you load an object into memory every time it's needed, you will eventually get horrendous memory leaks in your game, and your game will end up using all of the user's available RAM, and they will not be happy at you for that. So the constructor for a cache entry takes 3 parameters: cache, key, and item. So cache is the existing cache object. Key is the URL of the resource that is being, well, cached. And item is what you want to store in the cache. So it says there bitmap, HTML5 audio, web audio, some kind of object. So first of all, we are setting the current cache entry instance's cache property to the cache that was passed to it. We're setting its key property to the key. We're setting, you were basically just setting different properties of the instance to whatever was passed into it. Then we're setting a Boolean property called cached to false because it has not yet been. Then we've got a few different numerical properties. We've got touch ticks, which is 0. We've got touch seconds to 0, TTL ticks to 0, and TTL seconds to 0. And then we have this freed by TTL, which is set to false. We are defining now a function called free on the cache entries prototype, and as I said before, if you define it on the prototype, it means that every instance of the class will have access to this function. It takes a parameter called by TTL, which basically will be true if it was freed by the TTL, which I think is something to do with the automated garbage collection, or false otherwise. I'll need to see where it's actually used because I don't know what TTL is. So the free by TTL property is set to, either by TTL if it's true, or truthy, or false otherwise. So you'll see this kind of construct fairly often. Basically what it does is it returns the left-hand value if the left-hand value is truthy, or the right-hand value if it is not. Truthy is any expression for which the return value would be true. So 1 equals 1 would be truthy. 1 equals the string 1 would be truthy. True would be truthy. So if whatever you pass into there is something that will return true, then that's what it will return. Otherwise, it will return false. And if this dot cached is true, this dot cached is set to false, and we delete the underscore inner proper element of this dot cache with an index corresponding to the key. If you remember, the key is the URL of the resource in question. So this will be a resource URL. Inner will be an object containing all these different URLs, and that will be deleted from the cache when free is called, if it was cached. That probably made absolutely no sense to anyone. So next up on cache entry, we have a function called allocate. This allocates the resource. So if the cached property of cache entry is false, so this is checking for true, the exclamation point negates it, so it's checking for false. It sets the underscore inner element, or rather property at this dot key to the current cache entry, and then sets its cached to true. Then calls the touch function, which we'll see further down probably, and then it returns this, which is the current cache entry instance. This is all quite high level. In fact, stuff like this, is this really anything any of you actually want to go over? Because it's useful to know, but it's not vital for things like plugin development and things like that, because this is all very, very kind of low-level stuff for the MV engine. It's not necessary to break it down to a layman's level, because you'll probably never in your life need to go into any of this stuff. So should I just skip it, or are you getting anything out of this breakdown? I'll keep going until somebody weighs in on the chat on whether this is worth doing or not. Zeke says, I'm guessing these tutorials are more aimed at plugin devs. Yes, that is very much the case. You'll get a lot more out of it if you are a developer. It should hopefully be useful for people who aren't, but I'll be covering stuff that may be a bit over the head of people who don't do plugin development. Although, that said, okay, if the people watching are not computer people or developers, so a lot of this is going over their heads, is there anything in particular about RPG Maker MV, even on like the eventing side, that you don't know how to do that you would prefer me to do a tutorial for in the last hour? I think I'm starting to get the impression that the JavaScript side of things is something that is not going to be particularly conducive to a stream. I think I might jump into JavaScript as a text thing and just stick with doing something into Ruby, because I think the Ruby code is a bit easier to explain. So let me know, is there anything that you want to know how to do in RPG Maker on the whole, or anything about plugin development that I can explain to you? I'm going to switch things up for the last hour, make it a little bit more exciting and less dry. Wait till we get someone in the chat. Good question, says Zeke. I mean, I could move on to a slightly less low-level set of functions in MV that might be a bit easier to understand the inner workings of. But again, if none of you are coders, then there probably isn't much point. I'm quite happy to just make this a tutorial. Or I could just like stream a gameplay of something. I mean, Vampire Survivors has been updated lately. I could stick that on. Helpful Onions, not for me. He was just curious about RPG Maker as well. I'm just trying to think if there's anything I can personally think of that would be useful to go over. I mean, I obviously want to make this stream worth watching for the people who are watching it. I consider myself a script kiddie and deal with code on a limited level, as you know. Yeah, that is, I am aware of that. I'll tell you what, Zeke. I do not have the current version of the plugin you commissioned me for to hand right now. But would it be helpful if I like just took you through like my process for actually developing one? Like I can like recreate bits of what I've done on it so far so that you can kind of see how I actually make plugins for RPG Maker. Would that be something you'd be interested in? Let's give it a shot, see where it takes the stream. Okay, let's do that. So what I will do first of all is close MV because I've not needed it for anything, and we are going to delve into the weird and wonderful world of MZ, which I will need to open up and add to my stream sources if you give me just a second. So running through actual plugin dev should hopefully be more exciting than just kind of clinically working through the code line by line, because even I was getting bored of it, to be honest. It was an experiment, and it was one that ultimately turned out to be probably not the best idea, which is fine, really. It's all good. So what I'm going to do is just create a new project. Be a little second while it does that, because MZ loves to add all of the default resources into a project when you make one. What we're going to do is we're going to undo all of my changes to this, and then we're going to close all these because we ain't going to need them. And we are just left with a blank canvas. What I won't do is faff about with all the kind of commenty header stuff that I usually put into plugins. So back to the drawing board where we can figure out how to improve the venture. That's all that can be done when finding your niche. Yeah, that is very true. Very, very true indeed. Right, so I'm gonna add window capture in here. At this point, it would probably be as well being a display capture, but I don't want you to see all of my questionable things. I don't have any questionable things, I'm kidding. Okay, so you should be able to see MC there, but it's over my face. So let's put you down there. We want Notepad to take precedence over that. Oh, no, we don't actually. Now, how am I going to sort that out? Is there a way to like do show this thing if it's active and this other thing if it's not? Oh well, I will drag them around as I need to until I figure out how the hell Twitch works. I'm just a small indie developer. Right, so we've got our new MZ project here. Let's just see if it shows stuff. Oh no, that's interesting because I can see the thing, but I haven't actually. There we go. Yeah, so we've got the thing in MZ here. So if I go to Notepad, doesn't show the database, and it still shows it even when it's minimized. That's not great. Is there a way to? Oh well, that's for me to figure out at some point in the future when I'm not like in the middle of the stream. So the thing with this plugin that I'm going to be working on is that the lovely Siegfried and McBacon wants a thing where when you select a choice, when given a list of options to choose from in game, he wants to be able to assign a sound effect to each choice that will play when it's selected. Oh, just turn all my volumes down. So what I'm going to do is just add in as well a window capture for the game itself. There we go. Capture the cursor as well. Cool. Make that a little bit bigger. Right. So we're just going to add in an NPC here. Let's see, these are choices, and then show choices. Yes, no, maybe, ask again later. Blah, and fish. With no default. And then if I run this again, hopefully that will show up on the stream output. And then if I talk to the dude, I get all these options here. What I'm going to do is turn sound effects back on because that's going to be. And then if I turn desktop audio on. 20% should do it. You can see there, when I go through the options, I get a little cursor sound. But what we want to do is allow the user to input now I wonder if it doesn't actually show the thing for editing the event, which isn't great. You know what, I'm just going to do a screen capture, I think, or display capture. Okay, so I'm guessing that you can hopefully now see this part. So what we want to be able to do is do something like choice sounds, close 1, 100, 100. So that's the file name, the volume, and the pitch. And then when that option is chosen, it will play that sound. Now, in order to do this, the first thing in any plugin is to identify at what part in the base code you want to insert your plugin code at. So what I'll do as well is I will hide the other captures because they are no longer needed. Okay, so you see there that string is included in the choice, so we'll also need to make sure that that doesn't happen. So we need to do two things. We need to hook into the part of the code that selects an option when you either mouse over it or use the keyboard, and we also need to remove this tag from the option when it's displayed. So what you can do when you're running MZ in test play is you can hit F8 and it brings up the DevTools console. And from there, you're able to traverse any of the objects that are part of the engine. One of these is Scene Manager, which is a class that contains functions and properties to do with the current running scene. A scene being any screen in the RPG that the player can do things on. So, for example, the map is a scene, the battle is a scene, your shop is a scene, the title screen is a scene, etc., etc. And it has an underscore scene property, which contains all the information of the currently running scene, which in this case is scene map. Because we can traverse all of the objects in this, we can look at the windows in it. So we can get the choice list window, which is this window here, and we can look at its select function, which is the function that runs when you either hit up or down or move your mouse up and down. And when we hit enter, we see the code that runs when that function is called. And if you click this little F, you can navigate to it in the base code. So we can see here that this function is located in rmmz underscore windows.js, and it's actually window underscore selectable dot prototype dot select. Window selectable is one of the classes that window choice list inherits from. You can see there the type of choice list window is indeed window choice list, but it doesn't have a select function of its own. So when select is called, it traverses down the line until it finds one. The choice list window, look at window choice list dot prototype is window command, and window commands dot prototype is window selectable. I don't think window command has its own select either. That's just window selectable selects as well. But we do not want to add our code just to Windows selectable.prototype.select, because then it will happen for any window that you can select things in. So this is a window selectable. That's a window selectable. This is a window selectable. This is a window selectable. We do not want to play our sound options in anything but the choice window here. So what we're going to have to do is add a select function to window choice list that will override window selectables one. So that is the first thing we'll be doing in our plugin. And to do this, we just do window choice list dot prototype dot select equals function. And I know from looking at the code of the window selectable one that it takes index as a parameter. We need to maintain that because otherwise it will break. Trihan, if you have console open, we can't see it. Oh, I've had quite a few comments here. God damn it. Okay, so Bacon says, sometimes when I'm writing JavaScript, I want to throw up my hands and say this is bullshit, but I can never remember what this refers to. Zeke said, lol, yeah, display capture is your best bet here. Bacon, why did the jQuery developer never have financial problems? He didn't get a raise. Or he got a raise? He got a raise, I'm guessing. Zeke, do you have any windows open besides MC in the game that you intend to be open? If you have console... Right, okay. Because he was in dollar no conflict mode. Yeah. I still say he got a raise. Right, let me see if I can get this to a point where you can see the... Oh, you know what it'll be? I didn't do the transition, so you were still seeing all the capture stuff. There we go. Right, this should work now. Yes, you should be able to see the console now. I really need to have like a... Can you pop out the chat? Is that a thing that I can do? So that I can see it when I'm... Okay, I don't appear to have it. Oh, hang on. Chat settings. Do I have a pop out here? No. Okay, so I'm guessing I can't pop out the chat, which is fine. I'll just check it periodically. Anyway, right. So what I was doing there. So in the game, we want to modify this window here. So there's an object called Scene Manager that contains all of the stuff in the scene. And it has an internal scene property which contains all of the information on the currently running scene. We can see there it's a scene map. And that includes all of the windows that are part of it. And I happen to know that this one is called choice list window. If I didn't know that, if I just wanted to find it, I could like have a look through this list. And you see there, choice list window, it's a list of choices, so that is probably my best bet. But if you're still not sure, you can just type window. Oh, no, you can't. You can type window. And it'll just bring up anything that has a window in it, be it a function or a property. And in this case, once we scroll down enough, you'll see a choice list window. Go to your channel on your streaming platform of choice. In the chat window on your channel, select pop out chat. Am I still... Oops. Still not seeing it. Oh well, it doesn't matter. Yeah, so choice list window is an instance of a class called window underscore choice list. And we want to know what function is being called when you're moving between options. So if we check the dot, scrolling down, scrolling down, scrolling down. select X. That looks fairly promising, but we also have select, which sounds like it is probably something to do with selecting options. And indeed, we press enter and we see what the function looks like here. And if we click the F, it takes us to sources and shows us the code for the function that we've just looked at there. So this is window underscore selectable dot prototype dot select equals function index, blah, blah, blah. And if you want to know why it wasn't window underscore choice list, basically it doesn't have a select function of its own. It inherits it from its prototype. So if we look at window.choicelist.prototype, we see its window command. And then if we check whether window command has a select function, go into that in the sources, and it still brings up window selectable, so we must need to drill further down on that. And indeed, if we do window underscore command dot prototype, we'll see that that is window selectable, so that's the one that command windows inherit from. And we can see there that that is the select function of window selectable. And it takes index as a parameter, which is then used inside this code. So what we want to do is add a select function to window underscore choice list rather than windows.selectable, because we want to do something specific on this kind of window. If we just added to window selectable dot select, then it would affect this window here, it would affect this window here, it would affect all of this, because these are also instances of window selectable. So what we want to do, first of all, I'll just check that I don't have any rogue NWJS processes running. I do not, that is fine. Yeah, so we do window choice list dot prototype dot select equals function, and because the original had index as a parameter, we need to as well. Now the first thing we want to do is run whatever code the original function ran, because if we just do blah 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 blah, blah, that will completely overwrite these. So in fact, I'll show you. If I just do something like console.log test, and I save this in the plugins folder as a JS file, and just call it something like JS plugins. Got my plugin.js. If I then go to my plugin manager in MZ and I add in my plugin, make sure it's turned on. Don't worry about that because it just means I've not done the MZ annotation for it. If I then go in game, I'll open up my console just so that you can see this in action. So you see there that there was 4 instances of the console.log test because we had 4 window choice lists. Or rather, we had a window choice list where I was selecting options. If I go to this guy, you see there I'm getting test in the console, but nothing else is happening because I have completely overwritten the code that allows me to select stuff. And that is not good because we kind of want that to happen. We want to add to the functionality, not get rid of it. So the first thing we want to do is make sure the original code gets processed. And while we could just go and get the code from Windows Selectable and paste that in, what we can do instead is window underscore selectable dot prototype dot select dot call this index. And what that does is it calls the select function of the window selectable prototype, passing in the current object as this object and index as the index. The reason we need to do this is because if we didn't, it wouldn't know that the window that it was running the code on was the current window choice list and not an instance of window selectable, because we want to be more specific with our child classes. And then if we do console.log.test, now if we run test play, and open the console, see that we're still getting the test output, but it's doing the original thing. So that's good. So in here, we can do whatever we need to with that. So the first thing we want to do is to check whether the currently selected choice has that note tag in it. We want to check for the presence of this choice sign. And in order to do that, we need to know what the actual option is. So again, going back to our console to kind of delve through this and see what's going on with it. If I do say scene manager.scene.choice list window, and if we have a look at what is available to us here, it's likely going to be something to do with selection. So if we type select, yeah, that's just got the thing that we just did there. Let's try current. Current data seems like a good shout. So that will return if the current index is greater than or equal to 0, it returns the list at that point, otherwise it returns null. So let's see there, you can see we do have maybe selected, so this returns an object. You can tell because of the curly brackets. This is just an unnamed anonymous object that has various properties. So the object has a name, which is just the string representation of the choice, the symbol for it, whether it's enabled, and then a exterior data. And if I go up to here and do the same piece of code, you can see there that the name is this, which means that we would be able to match that if we looked for it. Boss, like, I'll be 20 minutes tops, and then I will give you all the attention you want. No, we want posies. That's this dog, man. Does anyone want a free dog? Like, I'm just throwing it out there. I am offering a dog for absolutely free to anyone who wants it. Right, where was I? Yeah, so we can see there that we can get this by looking at current data. Now, one thing to be careful with, we don't currently have an option selected there, so if we do current data, it's null. So that's something that we need to check for, because if we try to access properties of the current data object without first checking that it exists, we will get an error, which I will very helpfully show you now. So you've got an uncaught type error, cannot read properties of null, reading name. And the way to get around that is by using what's called the null chaining operator. So if I put a question mark there, I just get undefined because it gets to this point, cannot actually find current data, so it just kind of bins out gracefully rather than trying to access the property of something that it knows doesn't exist, which is great. So in our plugin here, if we do if this dot current data So what is in this will only run if this.currentData is not null, effectively. And if we do const name, in fact, const data equals this.currentData. Just doing that so that we can refer to the data with a shorter name. You'll see that a lot where variables are defined simply to make code shorter. Zeke, I got 2 already. 2 what? Oh, 2 dogs. Right, okay. And then I do const name equals data.name. Now, what we're going to do here is a thing called regular expression pattern matching. If I do, for example, const regex equals choice sound, so this is just looking for the literal match. Open a tag, choice space sound colon, and then I'll do a space, but I'll put a question mark after it because the space is optional, so you don't have to put it when you're doing the note tag. And then we want to match the file name, and we want to be able to refer to that later. So we do a set of brackets to define what's called a capture group, and then I'm going to do \w plus. What that does is matches one or more word characters, which is any letter or number. And then if I close that there, and then we do const matches equals name dot match regex, and then console.log matches. What I will need to do first of all, because I haven't added the optional bits, is if I just take out those for the moment. Run test play, open up the console. Okay, so we can see there that it has printed the matches from the regex pattern. The 0 index is always the entire match, which we don't want because we just want the capture group. So if we refer to matches at the 1 index, we'll get the file name of the sound that we want to play. And if I pick one that doesn't have that note tag, I just get null, which is fantastic. So we'll do an if statement just to make sure that matches is not null, because we want to make sure of that before we try to access properties of it. And then we can do, I'll kind of demonstrate something here. Now I can do that because the if statement creates its own block of code, the block being enclosed by these curly brackets. And in block scope, your variables only exist in the block in which they were declared. So although I could refer to name from here without redefining it, if I did that, it would just be data.name, which is not what I want. In redefining it here, when I refer to name inside this if statement, it will refer to this rather than this, but because that only matters inside the if statement, outside of this, name will still refer to this, even though I defined it here further down. And that's what's called block scoping. It's actually what you used to find in MV was that instead of const and its counterpart let, you used to use var. And var does what's called hoisting, where it allows you to reference a variable before you've declared it. And that has some weird and wonderful ramifications when it comes to block scoping, which is why it's recommended that you don't use it anymore, except in very specific cases. Yes, hello, Doc. You're just not going to leave me alone, are you? You're not. No. No, you've had dinner and you've got plenty of water. Are you just trying to be a nuisance because you're bored by me talking about code? Is that what it is? Is that what it is? Are you just bored by me talking about code? I should really like put the camera down a bit so that I can like just stream the dog, and then I'll get like a 50 million viewers because everyone absolutely loves my dog. Anyway, right? Can you go away now? Can you please go away? I will boop your snoot. See, I booped your snoot. What are you going to do about it? Do it again. Boop. Right. Go away and leave me alone. I'm trying to type. Yeah, so if there are matches, we can set. I'm not actually going to do that though, because I don't like redefining variables that I've already named in further blocks. So I'm going to call it file name instead. And then we can do const volume equals matches 2, and const pitch equals matches 3. And then just to demonstrate here that it's not going to be an issue if we refer to ones that weren't actually matched. You can see there it's undefined because we didn't actually have a volume or a pitch. There is no 2 or 3 index, so when we refer to it, it comes back as undefined because it's a variable that doesn't exist. So to that, we want to add optionally volume or pitch. So we'll do another group, but this one we don't actually want to capture. And if you don't want to capture a group, you put a question mark colon at the beginning of it. And then we want a comma, optional space, and then a group that we do want to capture, which will be 1 or more digits. But this entire thing is optional. So then we can see we've got this choice sound close 1, and then if I do try keyboard choice sound close 1 100, and what I'm going to do actually is console.log volume, since that's the second one that I did. And then if I go into me test play, open up the console, go into my choices, you can see there that volume is undefined there, but it's 100 there because it's matched the other one that I did. So now that we've got the file name, the volume, and the pitch, what we can do, in fact, so creating an anonymous object in JavaScript is as easy as that. So I've created an object called sound. It has 3 properties: name, which is set to the value of file name; volume, which is set to the value of volume; and pitch, which is set to the value of pitch. And then what I want to do here is give these default values. Remember when I was saying about the truthy versus falsy? So if this is truthy, it will return this, and if it's falsy, it will return this. And in so doing, I can give it a default value that will be referred to if there wasn't a match there. And this means that I can do this without getting any errors. And then I know from experience that there is a module called Audio Manager, and it has a play SE function which plays a sound effect, and that sound effect is an object much like this one. So because I created that, I can just pass that into the function. So then if I do my test play, each time I select a choice, when it has that, it plays the close 1 sound. Now there is a problem with this. If, for example, I do a file name that doesn't exist, I get an error because it's trying to load a file and it cannot. Now, there are a couple of things that you could do here. What I did earlier when I was talking to Siegfried about his desires for the plugin was I asked if he wanted me to add a check to make sure that the file exists before trying to play it. And I did so, and that was fine. But what I'm going to do here instead is a try-catch block. And what that should hopefully do is if this doesn't work, it will just log the error to the console instead of crapping out entirely. It did not do that. Okay, that was just... I thought I would try that. I wasn't sure if it would work. So I guess I will have to do it the other way, which is fine. So there's a bit of work involved in this. The first thing to note is that there is an NWJS keyword called require, and you can use that to import various modules that contain functions that make life easier and save you from having to write particular pieces of code. And one of these is the aptly named FS for file system. We also have one called path, and if I remember correctly, right, I'm going to need to go into my console for a couple of bits and pieces here. Also, is watching me make a plugin any more exciting than going through the default code? Just making sure that it's actually worth watching the process. So if I do require const fs equals require fs, const path equals require path. So path dot, is it base name is the one I want, I think. Zeke says, it's been nifty watching your process. Well, that's good at least. Is base name the one that I want? Oh, what's the thing called? There is it process? Process.main module dot path. Okay, that's not it. File name, there we go. Yeah, so if I do path dot, is it dir name, process dot main module dot file name, that gives me the directory that the project is running from, and that will still be the case if it is deployed somewhere, which is great. So that will help me to determine whether this file exists or not. So if I do const dir equals path dot dir name process dot main module dot file name, and then it's hard thinking up apt variable names for things sometimes. Yeah, so that'll give me the project thing, and then I want to add audio SE to that, because that's where the sound effect files are stored. Then I want const fill path equals dir plus file name plus audio manager dot audio file ext. So Audio Manager, the module, has a function called audio file ext that just gives you the extension for audio files, which is .ogg. I could have just put .ogg as a string, but the function is there for me to use, figured I might as well use it. And then, now that I've got the path, the dir, and the fill path, I can do const ex, or I'll just do if fs.existSync fill path, and then I can do console.log file exists, else console.log the file doesn't exist. And what I want to do is move this into this if statement here, because I only want to play the sound effect if the file is something that exists in the folder. So now, if I, oh, okay, I have an invalid or unexpected token. That means that I have buggered something up here. Let's see what it is. Got my two things there. Is it just exist sync? No, because that wouldn't give me a... The problem with invalid or unexpected token is you can't open the console to see at what line it broke. So I basically just need to take out bits of it until, aha, there we go. Nope, that's not, no, that's... Okay, so that makes it run. So it's somewhere in here. Path.turn, that's... I'm guessing it's this bit here for some reason. Because if I do that, I bet it will work. Yippers. Try doing single quotes. Okay, apparently that works. So now, if I open the console, okay, it is exists sync. So let me just fix that. Okay. So the file doesn't exist, and the file doesn't exist, which is not supposed to happen because that one does exist. That should have worked. So now you get to see my debugging process. Yay! Console.log is your friend, and you will never leave home without it once you start using it. Really great for doing debug statements and things like that. Although, once I've done this, I will show you something else you can do. Okay, and we can see there that it's because the slashes are not being escaped and it thinks that I was doing a control code, which is handy to know. Let me just, yeah, that's fine. So what I need to do is that, so that the slashes are actually considered part of the string. And what I'm going to do is if I go into my sources and then expand JS, expand plugins, and go into my plugin.js, what I can actually do is I can set a breakpoint here. And then when it gets to this part of the code, it will break and not break as in like stop working, but break as in like stop processing code so that I can run through it and see what's going on with it. As you can see here. And then you can mouse over all these things to see what values they have. So you can see the sound thing, and if this is just the require thing, there is that. And fill path is currently undefined because we are on the line that sets it. Then if I go step over next function call, and mouse over it, and you can see there that I am still slightly in trouble because it's done 2 slashes for audio and I forgot to put one after SE. So this is still not going to work. But you can see there how I used the console and the breakpoint to kind of be able to see that. I'm guessing with double quotes you only need the one. Oh, it's because of the double quote at the end. There we go. That's why it wasn't working, because it thought that I was escaping the quote. This is why we test. Go over that, and then you can see there that that is almost right. But we need a slash after audio as well. So that clearly needs to be, I'm guessing slash, oh yeah, slash s is something as well, isn't it? I'm just going to make sure that that should be okay, I think. I'm just going to get rid of this console.log. I'll disable this breakpoint for the moment. Just see there it played the close sound, didn't play that one. So it can detect whether the file exists or not, which is fantastic. And just to kind of demonstrate that it does the, in fact, did I? Yes, I did. So if I instead do close 120, you can see that's a lot quieter. So it defaulted to 100 if that wasn't there, but if it is, it gets the thing. Bacon says debugging, removing the needles from the haystack. Yeah, that sounds about right actually. That's a good way to look at it. So we've checked that the file exists. So we can take out these console.logs now. They are no longer needed. But I will still do a console.warn here just to say I'm going to do a thing here called string interpolation. So it's kind of like a string, but you surround it with backticks instead of quotes, and then it allows you to do $sign and then an expression inside curly brackets. And when it displays that string, it will interpolate the variable into the string, which we can see here if I open the console. Well, that won't work because that does actually exist. Okay, let me change that back to something that doesn't exist. You see there, I've tried to play SE close F1, but no file was found with that name. And because of the console.warn, it displays as a warning. And you can open that to see the stack trace as well, which is really handy. Now, you may have noticed a problem, Zeke. Do you see the issue here? Yeah, so what we want to do there is so what we're doing is introducing a new property called last index, and then only running this code if the index for select is not equal to it. This will be the case the first time because it will be undefined, and then we're setting it to the index so that next time at thingies, if we're mousing over the same thing, it won't reselect it. So now if I fix that so that it is the correct thing, and then I'm also going to just add a third one. For the pitch as well. Open up Adjust the Console. Okay, so that didn't play, so we'll need to figure out why that is. But you'll see nice and all over it, and no sound repetition. And no sound at all. So let's get that breakpoint back on the go and find out what's going on with that. Just expand the console a little bit. Ah, that's why, because we haven't actually added we haven't added pitch yet. So I just need to add a second copy of this to the regex pattern. And now you can get all sorts of different volume and pitch settings on it. Now you'll notice there that the sound was still playing even though I selected a different option. And one thing that Zeke asked me for was that when you select a new option, the currently playing sound stops immediately. So, just add an audio manager.stop SE to the beginning of that. Possibly a bit too early though. Okay, so here we hit upon an issue between mouse movement and cursor movement, because the cursor movement does that. So what we actually want to do is to take that out and put it in here instead. See how it just cuts out? I'm guessing that's what you wanted for that, Zeke. Okay, so that is now 9:05. I have been streaming for just over 2 hours, so I think I will probably end it there. So just thinking for the future, do you think it'd be a good idea if I did like slip into Ruby on alternating Wednesdays, and then the second Wednesdays I will just do like a stream of me doing plugin dev? Do you think that's preferable to doing the JavaScript deep dive? Because I suppose doing that I can explain like what JavaScript I'm using at the time as well, so it's not actually all that bad. I kind of like that idea. I think I'm going to go with that for the moment as a thing. I meant you sit and plan something out. Yeah, you're right. Right, I'm going to hide the display capture just because we are done with that. So I think I've got 5 viewers left, unless I need to refresh. Are you guys wanting to be raided into another channel and see if anybody's streaming anything cool? Well, is your friend raiding Bacon? Do you have any other channels to recommend? Yeah, go for it. Who do you? My pal Mizamensi is streaming Star Control. Yeah, I can go with that. So Mizamensi. Ooh, which one should I go with? Valorant or Star Control? Okay, Mizamensi it is. Star Control 2. There we go. Now, all I need to do is remember how the hell to actually raid a channel, because I cannot remember how to do it. It's done via the thingy, isn't it? If I go to my... There's a creator dashboard. Oh, can you do that? I didn't realize. So /raid Mizamensi.
Very much for the raid. Moderately surprised to see one, as I also just kind of do this in my spare time kind of thing. But welcome to the stream, and yo. Bacon Dragon. Excellent. Good to know. Good to know. Hungry for bacon now. So, yep, I'm playing. Yep, hello to you all. I'm playing what I consider to be the finest game of all time ever, bar none, Star Control 2. And just trying to think of what I can say.